Beyond Good and Evil, Part 7, Our Virtues. Firstly, on the nature of virtue. We can think of virtue as being a behaviour that shows one's high moral standards. Nietzsche writes in Aphorism 214 that if we are able to have virtues, we shall presumably have only such virtues as have learned to get along with our most secret and heartfelt inclinations, with our most fervent needs. So he is making the claim that instead of us training our behaviour and our actions to reflect the virtues, it is instead our virtues that reflects the already ingrained desires and inclinations within us. The virtues that supposedly exist are not some objectively good and moral thing written in the universe, but they are rather an emergent thing. They are things that arise out of our unconscious desires and inclinations. In order to understand these unconscious inclinations, we need to look deep within the psyche. Nietzsche says, let us look for them within our labyrinths. Labyrinths in the sense that our virtues are the emergence of the highly complex interactions between the many different drives and many different moralities that run our lives. Nietzsche also makes the comment that it is probable that we too still have our virtues, in the fact that we believe virtues to truly exist as real and objective things, and not just as arbitrary human creations. But it is probable only in the sense that philosophers of the future may dispense with this idea and reject the existence of virtue as an objective moral phenomena. Next, in Aphorism 215, Nietzsche makes a reference to Immanuel Kant and his famous work, The Critique of Practical Reason. In this work, Kant wrote, "Two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing wonder and awe, the starry heavens above me and the moral law within." So, Kant takes the view that nature and morality are two distinct things. One does not have authority over the other, although both of them do evoke a sense of awe. However, Nietzsche, in bringing this reference to light, is implying that the sphere of morality is purely another natural phenomenon. So it follows that we can understand morality by looking at the underlying complicated mechanisms that run them, namely the unconscious drives and desires that Nietzsche has spoken about multiple times throughout Beyond Good and Evil. Next, Nietzsche writes about the herd and their views on morality and moralization. In Aphorism 216, Nietzsche states that morality as a posture goes against our taste today. In other words, we don't like seeing public displays of morality. So instead, we judge without noise. We make moral judgments secretively and behind people's backs. We may love our enemies, but we don't show it. We may despise our enemies, but we don't show it. But Nietzsche does claim that this is actually a form of progress, just as it was progress when religious fervour stopped becoming a public display. In Aphorism 217, Nietzsche is making the claim that even those who are subtle in their moral judgments are still exerting their will to power. And bear in mind that these are the people we would have thought Nietzsche would have been more accepting of. And if they make a mistake in their judgment, then it is they who slander us for our testimony against them. Because they become so offended by their own error of judgment, it shows that they become enamoured by their virtue. So perhaps this explains it. Even though they appear to be subtle in their work, they are still obsessed with their image and the idea of being virtuous. The critique here shows that we can never be subtle enough in our judgment, and even those that appear to be are really moral fanatics, and this becomes apparent when they make an error of judgment. Nietzsche goes on to explain that when the psychologist is trying to understand the norm or the herd, they ought not to just observe them randomly, but to observe their reaction against the exception. It is by studying their instinctual, crafty, and unconscious reaction to the exception that gives the most pure and true reflection of their character. Now, on moralization, Nietzsche writes that moral judgment and condemnation is the favourite form of revenge of the spiritually limited. In other words, Nietzsche is saying that all moral judgments are just means of increasing one's sense of power. Again, reinforcing here the idea that the fundamental drive in people is the will to power. Judgments are usually directed towards the exception in an attempt to lower them to the common level. Hence, the importance of the psychologist studying their reactions to the exception in order to understand the herd's true drives and values. Next, there is a comment on the role of religion and the democratic nature inherent within the herd. Nietzsche writes, "They, the herd, struggle for the equality of all before God, and it is virtually for that purpose that they need the belief in God. So, the herd need to retain the idea of God in order to justify their lack of great qualities, in order to lower everyone to the same mediocre and yet equal level that they are at." In aphorism 220, Nietzsche goes on to explain the idea of disinterestedness. He writes, "Those things which interest and stimulate every higher nature and more refined and fastidious taste appear altogether uninteresting to the average man. So the common man may see the acts of the higher type of man as being disinterested because they do not share their own interests, and as the higher man's actions are not attached to any moral belief. But the higher man's acts are interested. Everyone's are. Even acts of love and sacrifice have one's interests at one's heart." Next, Nietzsche criticizes unconditional morality and states that it is immoral to say what is good for one is good for another. He says this because he believes that objective morality sabotages the higher man and his chance at development and actualizing his greatness. The virtues that society has come up with, like self-denial and meekness, injure precisely that which is great and rare in the higher types of man. Hence, it is immoral, in the moralist's own language, to deny them this opportunity. Next, Nietzsche moves on to the theme of pity and suffering. So, although pity is seen as a virtue in modern society, Nietzsche says that it is actually a vice born out of self-contempt. It is our vanity, our egoism, and our self-contempt that makes us want to suffer with others. It makes it more bearable for us to universalize this suffering that we experience. Nietzsche writes, "The man of modern ideas, that proud ape, is immoderately dissatisfied with himself, that is certain. He suffers, and his vanity would have him only suffer with his fellows." The herd's inversion of morality initially relieves them of their suffering, but this inversion is incomplete because now they are not meek enough. They do not sacrifice enough. It actually increases their suffering. It is a deep self-deception as the herd misunderstands their own values. They live even though their morality is anti-life. Their morality functions against life, but the moral being still lives, so it lives a displeased form of life. Nietzsche then briefly refers to the fact that we adopt many ideological costumes, and this shows our need to cultivate a self-image. We don't create one anew, but just adopt old, worn-out ones. Also, perhaps suggesting that our obsession with history shows that we are now passive consumers and not active agents in creating new history. Now, on the nature and importance of suffering, Nietzsche writes, "The discipline of suffering, of great suffering, do you not know that it is this discipline alone which has created every elevation of mankind hitherto? That tension of the soul in misfortune which cultivates its strength, its terror at the sight of great destruction, its inventiveness and bravery in undergoing, enduring, interpreting, exploiting misfortune, and whatever of depth, mystery, mask, spirit, cunning and greatness has been bestowed upon it. Has it not been bestowed through suffering, through the discipline of great suffering?" In other words, suffering is and has been the condition for all the advancements of mankind. The higher man, however, still has a form of pity, but it is a more far-sighted pity, as they are aware of how man is diminishing himself with their objective, democratic, and slave morality. Next, in aphorism 230, Nietzsche introduces the idea of the fundamental will of the spirit. This can be thought of as the will to master one's domain and of having one's feeling of power increase. And this requires the person to simplify everything and for nothing to be foreign to it. In other words, to have a feeling of complete control and understanding. Nietzsche says how this will be inclined to simplify the complex, to overlook or repel what is wholly contradictory. There may even be a sudden decision for ignorance, or it may even let itself be deceived. The spirit has a will to deception and superficiality. It manipulates what is foreign to it and sees through the lens of what it already knows. It alters it and it taints it. But Nietzsche claims that true seekers of knowledge will reject this will to ignorance, and will also reject the view that man is something separate from nature. We need to be cautious and wary of over-idealizing the human. They are still a natural phenomenon, just like everything else. Nietzsche concludes part 7 of Beyond Good and Evil by discussing some views on the nature of women. To start this segment, Nietzsche writes in aphorism 231 the following: "But at the bottom of us, right down deep, there is, to be sure, something unteachable, a granite stratum of spiritual fates, of predetermined decision and answer to predetermined selected questions." The basic surface level claim here is that by virtue of their gender, some traits are simply inescapable. But arguably, it actually suggests something inherently unteachable, naive and even stupid in the shared misogynistic prejudices that reside in men. Nietzsche claims that the democratic idea of equality, and in this case gender equality, is damaging and ignoble, and it is wrong to deny the fact that a differing physiology entails differing drives and values. In the very beginning of the preface, Nietzsche poses the question, suppose truth to be a woman, then what? Also in aphorism 220, Nietzsche writes, truth is, after all, a woman. Initially, by equating truth with the feminine, it could be thought of as Nietzsche criticising dogmatic thinkers for their lack of subtlety. Also, because Nietzsche believes that women's talent lies in their falsification, their deception, their beautification, it entails that they are incapable of possessing a proper will to truth. But also, by equating truth to a woman, Nietzsche is making the claim that what we have taken for truth up to now is precisely that which is feminine, that which is falsified, or deceiving, or beautiful, or pleasing to us. The feminine sustains life, it makes it possible, but importantly, does not amount to true knowledge. Thank you very much for watching, and be sure to like if you found the video useful and subscribe for more videos. See you next time on Feeling Philosophical, and goodbye.